I don't get disturbed, that this experience doesn't get disturbed.
Yeah, it's really important.
So
wherever you choose
yeah.
to give birth.
Absolutely.
Perhaps particularly in hospital, because you're more likely to have that adrenaline and the interruptions and the noises, which is not... We are mammals. We are mammals. And mammals, if you've got a cat or a dog that's ever had puppies or kittens, you know what they do when they have their young. They go off somewhere quiet and they hide somewhere and they make a nest, and they don't want to be, if you disturb them, you can cause big problems.
Absolutely.
We are mammals too.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that. So tell us a bit more about the Positive Birth Movement. What are the issues you're seeking to address?
I think it's a kind of a two-pronged attack, I suppose, the Positive Birth Movement. Some people have the misconception that it's like all about everyone getting together and saying what a brilliant birth they had, which isn't the case. It's basically coming at the problem, if you like, from two angles. One is, yes, to change the narrative around birth, to give women positive messages about birth and to share positive birth stories, which everybody's craving, I think. But also it's to acknowledge that, birth isn't, for a lot of women at the moment, unfortunately, birth isn't a positive experience. And so to think about what we can do to change that. So it's kind of coming at things from two angles. It's working to improve birth, but also celebrating what is good about birth and giving women those positive messages.
So why is it so important to have a positive birth experience?
Well, birth really matters to women. I think you were saying earlier, how many years down the line women remember birth. Women remember the day they have their baby for the rest of their life. It is a hugely significant day in a woman's life. So for that reason alone, really, we should be getting it right for as many women as possible. But I think, it's also it's a transformative moment where, especially with your first baby, you're kind of stepping across a threshold into motherhood, which is a hugely demanding role, and it's a whole new life, really, as anyone who's become a parent knows. It is a day of huge change, and you need to go into that new life feeling positive and feeling strong. Unfortunately, a lot of women are beginning that journey of parenthood feeling very damaged and very broken and very traumatized. And that is not going to help them to be the best mother they can be for their baby, although many traumatized women are, brilliant mothers. I'm not saying that. But it's obviously makes it much harder for people to give, to their babies and to enjoy that time. And to, it makes it tough. Postnatal depression is a huge problem. Postnatal PTSD is a huge problem. And a lot of the time it's being just accepted as, that's just birth. Birth's just an awful thing that women have to get through and leave their dignity at the door. And as long as they get their healthy baby at the end, that's really all that matters. And all of these messages that we get that say, well, it doesn't really matter and it's just part of a woman's experience. And I think people like me are trying to challenge that and say, no, sorry, we can do better than this. We don't need to leave a whole generation of women broken after their birth.
That's very profound and so true. And it makes you want to cry.
Yeah. It's very tough. And it stays with you forever. I gave a talk actually in my little tiny sleepy village in the UK once, and it wasn't really it was just for people in my village. It wasn't like a big talk to a birth community. But, this woman came up to me at the end. I write about her at the end of my book. She came up to the end. She must be in her 80s, and she had tears in her eyes. And she was remembering how she had already had one child, and she was had to go to hospital for the second baby. And she was so deeply attached to this first child, and she was so upset to have to leave them behind. And she had to stay in hospital for a week. And it's like, this is what I'm saying about the power dynamic. We've had these situations. It's not just about the actual moment of birth and the trauma of that. It's also about what happens around it. Why is a woman being told what she can and cannot do in terms of when she can hold her baby, when she can leave the hospital, when she can see her, her other, the baby's sibling, etc. All this power and control around the birth. And, she had tears in her eyes remembering, and she still felt she'd let her first child down by not being able to be there for them. So it's very powerful, and we need to be doing it better.
We are here with Milli Hill, as I said, the founder of the Positive Birth Movement. We had a bit of a cry in the break and a little bit on air as well, because we are so all passionate about women having positive birth experiences and what birth means to women. And we're really passionate about that. We're going to talk with Milli about what she recommends to anyone still resolving their previous experiences. And would you like to let us know a little bit about what your tips and recommendations might be for women that are still resolving their previous birth experiences?
Okay. So if you've already had a difficult birth, you mean, and you're thinking about how can I prepare for a better birth this time? Yeah, it's quite complicated, because it's not just about focusing on the next birth. I think before you get to that stage, you've got to go back. And you've got to acknowledge, first of all, for some women, it's actually, and sometimes it happens when we're having a conversation like this, they're like, oh, it is okay for me to feel that wasn't right that happened to me, and that it really made me feel awful, because I think culturally we're in a place where we're saying to people, that's just birth, and a healthy baby is all that matters, and all these messages that they get, which kind of say, move on. Let's not talk about that, and there's a wider problem with mental health anyway, isn't there, where people are feeling things are changing, but for a long time people have felt it's not okay to talk about the tough stuff. So first of all, if you're thinking about having a second baby and you've had a traumatic first birth, the first thing that you need to do is to go back to the experience you've had, acknowledge that you feel hurt by it, or whatever feelings you might have, and seek some way of healing from that, I think, before you then think about preparing for the next birth. And once you've done that, and obviously there are different channels you can go down, I think going back over what happened, either with somebody that is close to you or with a professional, and getting some resolution is a really good idea. But then once you've done that and you feel that you have kind of like unpacked it and packed it again, if that makes sense, then I think you can think about, how can I make the next one different? And you can make it different. And this is a message for first-time mums as well, is that taking control of your birth experience. A lot of people are told birth is beyond our control, so there's no point preparing, there's no point worrying about it. Whatever happens to you on the day is what's going to happen to you on the day. And I really want to challenge that idea, because obviously I'm not being too optimistic here. Birth is, nature, and things can change, and we don't all get the birth experience that we want. But, and this is a big but, there are masses and masses of things you can do when you're preparing to maximise your chances of having the best possible birth. And also to know that if things do deviate from the course that you're hoping for, that there are still ways that you can hold on to some of what you wanted and still feel powerful and in control in the experience. And what we know from talking to women who have had traumatic births is that normally it's not the events, it's not what actually happened, what kind of birth they had, that's causing them to feel traumatized. It's more about how they were treated and that feeling of losing control. So there's a lot that you can do in advance to change that.
For example, what are some of those things that women can do, right now, if they're in that position that they're pregnant or that they're planning to have a child?
Well, I think just really learning about your options, finding out as much as possible. We talked already earlier in the program about oxytocin. So learn about oxytocin, learn about the best possible birth environment, think about where you want to give birth, what might be best for you, what does the evidence say. Lots of people, certainly in the UK, just gravitate towards obstetric units and hospitals, even though they've got no other risk factors and no physical health problems at all. So there are other places we can give birth that might, the evidence in the UK shows that you're much safer actually if you give birth in a midwife-led unit or at home. So there are lots of things you can do.
I think that evidence is worldwide. I think that's correct. Not worldwide, in first world countries, for women that have all the necessary pathways to get to a place if they do need help So,
I mean,
definitely not worldwide.
It varies from place to place, and geography makes a difference, and distance from the hospital, and the quality of your midwifery, and your own personal health. And so there's lots of things to consider, but we need to think about people as individuals as well. And that's another problem, is that we're sort of, everything becomes, especially in our healthcare systems, it's the individual care gets a bit lost. So thinking about what kind of birth you really want is okay, and making a plan for that. But also making, in my book, I talk about making plans B and plan C and plan D. And even if you are planning to have your home birth with your candles and, fairy lights and everything, make a plan for a cesarean. Because there's so many choices within cesarean that you can take control of, and that can make that experience better for you. And learn about the worst case scenarios. I spent some time talking to women who'd had general anaesthetic cesareans when I was writing my book. And that really is hugely traumatic. I mean, that really is so hard, that experience. But some of them said to me, I said, well, what could have made it better? And they said, well, one idea that they'd heard about was that while you're still under general anaesthetic after your baby's been born, to have the baby put onto you and for somebody to take a photo. And the women who had that experience treasured those pictures, so it's like thinking about how no matter how this unfolds, there are ways that I can make it meaningful and improve it for myself.
Resources on your website or places that people can go to that you know of that can help them, because often the case is that we don't know what we could have if we don't know. So how do we find out what are all the different options that we could be?
Well, it's all in my book, first of all, but apart from that,
so that's the Positive Birth book. It's Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond. I'm Anna-Leah Thier. In the studio today with us was Milli Hill from the Positve Birth Movement. She founded and she is the director of the Positve Birth Movement. She's also written the book, the Positve Birth book. And to find out all about her work and the work of her amazing team, you can go to positivebirthmovement.org. That's positivebirthmovement.org. And also, if you'd like to know more about the Home Birth Australia conference that we were speaking about before, just go to homebirthaustralia.org. And thank you, Milli, for coming in on the show today. We're super, super excited to have you here and to be attending your talks. Thank you so much for coming all the way from the UK and via Sydney.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be here.
And we'd love to hear from you. Go on to www.pbbmedia.org